The English Channel lashed against the pebbled shore of the Sussex coast, a constant, murmuring presence in the genteel town of Eastbourne. In the 1950s, this was a place of retired colonels, well-to-do spinsters, and a quiet, predictable order. At the heart of this society, a figure of immense trust and comfort, Dr. John Bodkin Adams. Portly, with a round, kindly face behind thick spectacles, he was the quintessential country doctor. He made house calls at all hours, dispensed jellies and comforting words to his ailing, often elderly, patients, and was a fixture at the deathbeds of the town's most affluent residents. If the story resonate, try to press like button and subscribe to this channel for more stories like this. In the mid-1950s, a sinister pattern began to emerge, one that would eventually trigger one of the most complex and sensational criminal investigations in British history, a case that raised a terrifying question. What if the man tasked with saving lives was, instead, meticulously and profitably ending them? The story of Dr. Adams's alleged crimes is not one of bloody knives or frantic chases. It is a story told in whispers, in wills, and in the meticulous notes of a tenacious Scotland Yard detective. It began, as such things often do, with a single, curious event. On a cold morning in 1956, the body of a wealthy widow, Mrs. Edith Alice Morell, was discovered in her luxurious home. Her death was not, in itself, suspicious. She was 81 and had suffered a series of strokes. What was unusual was the sheer volume of drugs found in her system and the peculiar beneficiary of her will. Among her bequests was a chest of silver and a Rolls-Royce car, both left to her attentive physician, Dr. John Bodkin Adams. This was not an isolated incident. Over the preceding years, a startling number of Dr. Adams's wealthy, elderly patients had died under similar circumstances. They were often women, living alone, with substantial estates. Their deaths were always attributed to natural causes such as stroke, heart failure, cerebral hemorrhage, but they shared a common thread. They occurred after Dr. Adams had prescribed massive and often unrecorded doses of opiates and sedatives. And, with uncanny frequency, Dr. Adams found himself remembered fondly in their wills. The local police had heard the rumors. The town itself was abuzz with them. In the tea rooms and on the seafront, people spoke in hushed tones about the luck of Dr. Adams. But a rumor was not evidence. These were the deaths of old, sick people. Who was to say the doctor hadn't simply been easing their suffering, as was his duty? And what respectable citizen would openly accuse such a pillar of the community without ironclad proof? The break came from an unexpected source, a solicitor named W.S.R. Richard Withers. He had been deeply unsettled by the death of another patient, Mrs. Gertrude Hullett. Mrs. Hullett was a wealthy woman who had been suffering from depression following the death of her husband. Just months after her husband's passing, Mrs. Hullett herself was dead. The cause was recorded as an accidental overdose of barbiturates, prescribed by none other than Dr. Adams. He was, again, a beneficiary, receiving a valuable clock and a chest of silver. Withers, convinced something was terribly wrong, took his concerns to the authorities. This time, the whispers were too loud, the pattern too stark to ignore. The file landed on the desk of the Director of Public Prosecutions, and soon, a team from Scotland Yard's elite murder squad was dispatched to the sleepy town of Eastbourne. Leading the investigation was Detective Superintendent Herbert Hannam, a methodical and relentless officer. Hannam began the painstaking work of exhuming the past. He and his team pored over hundreds of wills, cross-referenced death certificates, and interviewed countless relatives, nurses, and domestic staff. What they uncovered was a pattern of behavior that went far beyond medical negligence. Nurses who had attended Dr. Adams's patients reported being instructed to administer injections of heroin and morphine in doses that made them deeply uncomfortable. They spoke of patients who were alert and conversational one moment, only to slip into a terminal coma shortly after the doctor's visit. Many of these instructions were given verbally, with Dr. Adams deliberately failing to make entries in the patient's medicine books, a clear breach of medical protocol. One of the most damning accounts came from the nurses caring for Mrs. Morell. They described a regime of drugs so heavy that the patient was kept in a near-constant stupor. On the night she died, Dr. Adams had ordered a final, massive injection. When one nurse expressed concern, he reportedly patted her arm and said, "Don't worry, nurse. She will be all right." She died shortly thereafter. Hannam's investigation revealed that Dr. Adams had amassed a small fortune in bequests: cash, jewelry, cars, and antiques from the estates of patients who had died under his care. The total value ran into the tens of thousands of pounds, a colossal sum in the 1950s. On July 19, 1956, the police made their move. Dr. John Bodkin Adams was arrested at his home and charged with the murder of Mrs. Edith Alice Morell. The charge was not for a single violent act, but for a series of actions: the administration of lethal doses of drugs over a period of days, with the intention of hastening her death to secure his legacy. The trial of Reversus Adams at the Old Bailey in London in 1957 was a media sensation. The press dubbed it the trial of the century, and the public was captivated by the image of the avuncular doctor in the dock, accused of being a calculating serial killer. The prosecution, led by Attorney General Sir Reginald Manningham Buller, nicknamed Bullying Manor by the press, laid out its case. It was a story of greed and manipulation. They argued that Adams had systematically eased the path of his wealthy patients, not out of compassion, but for financial gain. The wills and the drug regimens were the centerpieces of their argument. The defense, however, crafted a powerful counter-narrative. Led by the brilliant and flamboyant Geoffrey Lawrence, QC, they did not deny that Adams had prescribed large quantities of drugs. Instead, they framed it as an act of mercy. They painted a picture of a dedicated doctor, working tirelessly to relieve the unbearable suffering of his elderly, terminal patients. This was not murder, they argued. It was palliative care, a form of euthanasia, before the term was widely used or legally defined. Lawrence masterfully cross-examined the medical experts, highlighting the uncertainty in determining exact causes of death in frail, elderly individuals. He portrayed the nurses as confused or mistaken about the dosages. Most importantly, he presented Dr. Adams himself as a simple, God-fearing man, motivated only by a desire to ease pain. The bequests, mere tokens of gratitude from profoundly thankful patients. The trial turned on a critical legal ruling by the judge, Sir Patrick Devlin. He instructed the jury that if they believed Dr. Adams's primary intention was to relieve suffering, then they must acquit him, even if he knew his treatment might shorten life. This principle, known as the doctrine of double effect, became the cornerstone of the defense. After a long and complex trial, the jury deliberated for just 44 minutes. Their verdict: not guilty. The courtroom erupted. Dr. Adams was a free man. The public, for the most part, breathed a sigh of relief. The comforting narrative of the benevolent doctor had prevailed over the sinister one of the greedy murderer. An acquittal, however, is not the same as a declaration of innocence. The trial had only covered one death, that of Mrs. Morell. The police had files on many others, including Mrs. Hullett, for whom there was also a strong case. Following the acquittal, the authorities decided it would be impossible to secure another conviction. The charges related to other deaths were dropped. Dr. Adams returned to Eastbourne and, astonishingly, resumed his medical practice. He was, however, a changed and shadowed figure. The General Medical Council conducted its own inquiry and struck him from the medical register for professional misconduct related to his prescription practices, fraud, and failure to keep proper records. Though he was later reinstated after an appeal, his reputation was permanently tarnished. The whispers in Eastbourne never fully ceased. He continued to practice until his retirement in the early 1980s, a constant, unsettling reminder of the town's brush with notoriety. He died in 1983, never having admitted to any wrongdoing. The case of Dr. John Bodkin Adams remains officially unsolved. We will never know with absolute certainty how many of his 160-plus patient deaths were natural and how many were hastened. But the evidence points to a deeply disturbing probability. So, who was Dr. John Bodkin Adams? Was he a misunderstood humanitarian or a cold-blooded predator? Criminologists and historians who have studied the case lean heavily towards the latter, classifying him as a classic angel of death or medical predator. His motives appear to have been a complex and toxic blend of greed and a desire for power and control. The financial gains were significant and provided him with a lifestyle of comfort and prestige: the Rolls-Royce, the fine silver, the substantial bank accounts. But the money may not have been the sole driver. There is a profound power in holding the power of life and death. For a man like Adams, who was known to be socially ambitious and somewhat insecure, playing God to a roster of dependent, wealthy patients may have been intoxicating. He could decide when their suffering ended, and in doing so, he could orchestrate their gratitude from beyond the grave. The bequests were not just money. They were trophies, tangible proof of his influence over his patients' final moments. He operated in the gray areas of medicine, exploiting the ambiguity of treating the terminally ill. He understood that in the fog of end-of-life care, intent is everything, and intent is notoriously difficult to prove. He hid behind the veil of medical authority, counting on the reluctance of colleagues, nurses, and the legal system to question a doctor's judgment. The Bodkin Adams case left a deep and permanent scar on the British medical and legal systems. It forced a painful but necessary public conversation about the ethics of end-of-life care, the use of powerful analgesics, and the fine, often blurry line between palliation and murder. It led to significant reforms. The laws surrounding the witnessing of wills were tightened to prevent undue influence from individuals like attending physicians. Medical practices were scrutinized, leading to stricter regulations on the record-keeping and administration of controlled drugs. The case established crucial legal precedents, most notably the judicial clarification of the double effect principle, which remains a cornerstone of medical ethics to this day. Perhaps its most profound legacy is one of pervasive unease. The story of Dr. Adams is terrifying not because of its brutality, but because of its subtlety. He was not a monster who lurked in alleyways. He was a trusted figure who entered homes with a black bag and a smile. His weapon was not a gun, but a syringe. His victims were not the strong and the healthy, but society's most vulnerable, those whose deaths were least likely to be questioned. The case serves as a chilling reminder that evil does not always announce itself with a roar. Sometimes, it comes as a comfort, a soft voice in a sick room, a promise of relief. It reminds us that trust, while essential to a functioning society, must be tempered with vigilance. The Bodkin Adams affair exposed the dark potential that lies at the intersection of human avarice, medical power, and the ultimate vulnerability of death itself. It is a story that whispers a warning across the decades. Beware the healer whose cure is far, far worse than the disease.